There is a machlekes. There are many disputes between Rav and Shmuel. There is one of the many disputes is, but a holcha b'mamar achar haroiv. The main Gemara is in Bava Basra and it's in Bava Kama, but here it's referred to. The Taisus Tezayin Omed Aleph, the bottom Taisus, mentions it. It's a machlekes Rav and Shmuel, and we paskan like Shmuel. That ein holcha b'mamar achar haroiv. What about in Din Nefashis? You go basarayv to give the death penalty. The Gemara seems to have a kal v'chomer. The pasuk says that you go basarayv in dayanim if there's a split vote in a bezdin. If you have a bezdin, a Sanhedrin Tana, Sanhedrin Gdolah has 71 members. Sanhedrin Tana has 23 members. The third Din Imamanis has 3 dayanim. So if you have 3 dayanim, do you go basarayv? If it's a split vote 2-1, so the Gemara says it's a kal v'chomer. The pasuk says that you go basarayv, indeed in the nefashis. Well, let's say you only have a roiv of echad. From the 23 dayanim, 12 say chayiv misa and 11 say pata. So the Gemara says if 12 say pata from misa and 11 say chayiv, so roiv of echad is good lahakel, but the roiv of echad is not good lahachmir. So you have to have more than a roiv of echad. So you have to have 13 to 10. You have to have 13 to 10. So the Gemara says you have a pasuk that says that you go basar roiv and did in the fasha. So it's a kal v'chomer that you go basar roiv and did in mamanis as well. That's by the split vote and the dayanim. So what about over here? Not the split vote and the dayanim. What if you had the roiv is mavar? What the facts of the case are? So the din is in mammon and holcha b'mammon achar harov. Machlekes Rav Shmuel paskin like Shmuel. Usually, hilchas karabbi suri kishmol bedina. Usually, there are exceptions to the rule. The consensus was that whenever there's a machlekes Rav Shmuel, if it's in the area of Isa, they have to be paskin like Rav. It's in the area of Didi Mammon, it's be paskin like Shmuel. So ein holcha b'mammon achar harov. So if mammon you don't go basar, should be a kal v'chomer. That nefashos you shouldn't go basar. So that's what the Rambam writes. So the Rambam, we had that Rambam at the end of the first parak. The end of the first parak, the Gemara quoted a Mishnah from Machshirin, here the top line, on Tezvavam and base. Says in the margin that that's a Mishnah in Machshirin. So it says, if someone left a baby on the footsteps of the police station, they gave birth to a baby and they gave it up for adoption. They don't want you to know who the parents are. You're going to hold them responsible for the upkeep of the child. So they're mafka their baby, they leave in the police station. So do you assume the child is Jewish or do you assume the child is not Jewish? So the Mishnah says you go basar roiv. The majority of women who are up, you don't include the women who are 95 years old, they can't give birth to any baby. You don't include the women who are 10 years old. Here in the neighborhood, they probably do have children at the age. The Puerto Ricans know how to have children, but you include those women who are shaykh that they can have babies. So you go basar roiv. So the Rambam says, if the roiv of the people in the community are Jewish, so you assume that the baby is Jewish. You take him in the yeshiva, and he gets married, and he davens for an and he counts for the minyan and everything. But he says, if his wife will be mizana, you can't give it a death penalty, because he can't go basar roiv to give din in the nefashos. If you don't go basar roiv in mamanis, so he certainly can't go basar roiv in the nefashos. That's what the Rambam writes. The Ravid says, what is he talking about? There are 2 Gemaras that say beferish that you do go basar roiv. So one Gemara is like this. There's a din with the rashta v'chakarta v'shahalta heitev. You have to have the sheva chakiris. He say Reuben killed Shimon. So they ask him, what day of the week was it, and what day of the month, what month, and so on, and what time of the day, and what color clothing was he wearing, and how did he kill him, with a knife, with a gun, did he poison him? He asked a lot of questions. So the Gemara says, if it's the beginning of the month, they didn't have printed calendars like we have today. every month the Bezdin would decide whether to end the previous month with 29 days or with 30 days. So at the beginning of the month, a lot of times the people were a little disoriented. They arrived with the people, many people wouldn't know when Rosh Chodesh was. Not everybody heard the announcement when Rosh Chodesh was. Since Roy B'nai Adam would make a mistake, so you go Basar Roiv to say that as long as he's not off, as long as he's not 2 days off, if he's 1 day off in the days of the month, that's okay, because Roy people would make a mistake. So the Rabbit says, don't you see from the Gemara that you go Basar Roiv? So Rab Soloveitchik said, in the name of his father, and the Rogatchover has this in his Sefer on the Rambam, the same answer. That's not, you're not going Basar Roiv to ascertain the facts on the case. You know that Reuben killed Shimon, that's what he's saying. There's a din, you need Risha v'Chakira. So you ask him, what time did he kill him? So he killed him 2 minutes to 1. He has to know. We have watches, so we know 2 minutes to 1. The days of the Gemara, they didn't have watches, but they had a guess based on the sundials. So it wasn't so precise. So as long as you're not off more than an hour or two, the whole machlokes hatanoim, how many hours can you be off? The two witnesses, one of them says it was before noon, one of them says afternoon. No, that they're contradicting each other, because that you can tell. Everybody can tell whether it's before noon or afternoon. Which direction is the sun making the shade? Where is the shade? Which side of the street is the shade? So that you can tell. That's a clear mistake. But they both say that it was in the morning, but one thinks that it was 9 o'clock, one thinks 9:15. That's the same thing. 9 o'clock, 9:15, same thing. But if one says 9 and one says 11, that's 2 hours off. So you have to judge what's reasonable, what amount of time, what's the margin of error that we allow that is not considered a contradiction between the two Eidim, that they're saying the same thing. So because Roy B'nai Adam will make a mistake what day of the month it is, in the beginning of the month till halfway through the month, then by the time you get halfway through, they should already know. Everybody will know already when the month began, what day of the month it is. So because Roy B'nai Adam would make a mistake, so that's why you cover the din. You're not ascertaining any facts based on the Roy. Here, you're ascertaining a fact that the boy was Jewish. You're following the Roiv that the boy was Jewish, because Roiv of the women who are that age that they're able to give birth to babies, the Roiv of the women, childbearing age in that community, are Jewish, and therefore we decide that the boy is Jewish, and therefore he's married to the Jewish girl. She's an Eshes Ish. If he's from the Miut, if he's a guy, then Ein Kiddushin Tov, since she's not an Eshes Ish. So there the Rambam says you're trying to ascertain whether the woman is an Eshes Ish, and you're ascertaining based on the Roiv. You can't give din in the Nefashis by ascertaining the facts based on the Roiv. But here we're not ascertaining facts. We're just being kaveh how detailed does the Drisha v'Chakira have to be. Whatever amount of time people may make a mistake, whatever the margin of error is, you can't expect the Eidim to always know that. So that's, you only have to know what day of the month it was within a range of 2 days, within a range of 1 or 2 days. So that's a big kovei adinim. We usually kovei adinim based on the Roiv. So the Gemara raised the possibility, maybe by dinin nefashas, we should bend over backwards to darshan ol psukim lahakel, because there's a pasuk in the end of Masei, I think, where it says v'hitzila ho'eda, v'doshu ho'eda v'hitzila ho'eda. So v'hitzila ho'eda maybe means you bend over backwards always to be mekel. So maybe we should insist that if 1/8 says it was the 3rd day of the month, 1/8 says 4th day of the month, so you don't accept it. The Gemara says no, since Roy B'nai Adam would make such a mistake in the first half of the month, because they didn't have printed calendars, it depends when Bezdin declares Rosh Chodesh. So the Chachamim will cover the din based on the Roiv. Maybe there is such a din b'hitzila ho'eda. If you have a pasuk, and you can darshan the pasuk 2 ways. You can darshan it one way and it comes out to be a big kula in din nefashim. You can darshan another way, it'll come out to be a chumrah. So whenever the two ways to darshan a pasuk, you always noite lehakel when it comes to din nefashis. Like in Kochim, the midrash Torah and the drushes bam are slightly different from kol Torah kula. There's a klal ein lamedim lamed min halamed. If din B was learned out from din A, hekesh or gzerishava or something, then you can't in kol Torah kula you can learn out C from B and D from C and E from D. You can learn out one din learned out from another din. There's a mamatzina, a kavachayim, and a gzerishava, and it is you keep on going learn and void. Except for Kochim. And Kochim ein lamedim lamed min halabin, and it's a long sugya in Izel Mekayman, exactly the details of this. What is it? What if they're both Gzerah? What if they're both Kalvachaimers? What if one is a Gersheva, one is Kalvachaimer? Keeps on going and going, all the details of this then. So the Midrash Torah and the Reshes Spam are slightly different in the area of Kochim and Lamed Lamed Men Alamed. So the Midrash Torah and the Reshes Spam are slightly different in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara quotes in Gemara Maseches Avodah Zarah says, "Shaketz to shaktzenu b'sa'ev to sa'avenu kecherimhu." So that pasuk implies if you're darshaning a pasuk and you're not sure which way to darshan, you should always darshan the chumrah. If you're not sure about the Avodah Zarah, whether it's asa b'hana or not, so go l'chumrah. Go l'chumrah. So Midrash HaTorah and the Drashas Bem in Kochim is slightly different, and in Din Nefashis is slightly different. So the Gemara raised the possibility that maybe I should say v'hitzilahu eidah, I should require precision to know what day of the month it is, even though Rav Ben Adam will make a mistake. Gemara says no. In being kaveya, the din, how much precision you need for the Agor to say this, we say the Rav is good. But that's not really a kasha against the Rambam. The Rambam says you can't go basar to ascertain the facts of the case, to establish that the woman is an eshes ish, because we never knew the baby that they left on the steps to the police station. We're not sure whether the baby was Jewish or not. The Rav said the baby was Jewish, but just based on a Rav, you can't ascertain the facts to paskin that the woman is an eshes ish. Not going to get to din nefashis. You take him into the yeshiva, you give him a smicha, you tzarf him to the minyan. It can be the Baal Takeya, it can be the Baal Tefillah. But if his wife is mezana, the Rambam says you don't give din nefashis. So the kasha that the Ravid asks from the 2 days Rosh Chodesh, what day of the month it is, so that the Rogat Trover answered that. Rav Soloveitchik said the name of his father, the same answer. And that's a different thing. But then there's another kasha the Ravid has. There's a din that Eishes Ishes Insa is Chayv Misa. Both the boil and the nevelas, they're both Chayv Misa. What if the Eishes Ish is a Ktana? So if she's younger than Gimel Shana B'ya Mecharein B'Yosef B'ya, so it's not an Avera of Gilead Rice. But if she's older than 3, but she's a Ktana, so she's not Chayv Misa, but the one who is Mizana with her, if he's Bar Mitzvah, he'll be Chayv Misa. But she's a little girl. So the Gemara raises an issue. So the Ravid is quoting a Gemara. The very first Mishnah in Yevamis says that if a man gets married and it turns out that the wife that he married is an islandess, so it's Kiddusha Toes. Because normal people get married in order to be able to have children. So if the woman turns out to be an Akora, she didn't have any children. Akora sometimes is due to diet. She doesn't eat the right kind of food. Or no exercise, whatever, it could be different thing. An Akora is one thing. An islandess is a different. Islandess, the whole body grows differently. Islandess is a whole different barrier. So if a man marries a woman, it turns out she doesn't have any children, you don't say it's a Kedusha Toz. But if it turns out the woman is an islandess, the simple pshat in the Mishnah is that you don't need a get at all. Some Rishonim say you need a get midirabbanan, but the pashta says you don't need a get at all because mamish Kedusha Toz. So how do you give the man the death penalty? The Mishnah says if a man is mizana with an eshes ish, and the Eishes Ish is not even bas mitzvah yet. She's over the age of 3, but she's not bas mitzvah, so she doesn't get a punishment because she's a ktana la bas onshin. But the boy will get the death penalty. How can you give him death penalty? There's a miut of women who are islanders. So it may turn out that it's a kiddushay tois. So the Gemara says, you see that you go basur rive, and rive women are not islanders. So the rive is against the Rambam. Don't you see that you go basur rive to be mevar the facts of the case, to see that the woman is an Eishes Ish, that she's not an islandess. So that's a kasha on the Rambam. The Rambam says you can't go basur rive to be mevar the facts of the case to give the death penalty. Cannot go basur, because in Mamanis you don't go basur, right? So it should be a kavachayim that in the Nefashis you don't go basur. Because the Gemara made that kavachayim. The Gemara said, how do you know you go basur, right? A split vote in a din Torah. It's 2-1. How do you know you go basur? Because you go basur, right, indeed in the Nefashis. If it's lechumre in the Nefashis, you need a rive of shnayim. But if it's lekula, a rive of echad is enough. In Mamanis, we don't distinguish between l'chumra and l'kula, because whatever is l'chumra for one is l'kula for the other. They're two parties. So whatever is l'kula for him is going to be l'chumra for the other one. So the Gemara says that that kavachayim, that if you go basar roiv in the fashis, kavachayim you go basar roiv in mamanis by the split vote. So it should be the same kavachayim over here. So if by mamanis we pass kan like Shmuel, you don't go basar roiv. And the imam is to be maxi mama from a muksuk, so it should be that in fashis you shouldn't follow Rav either. So that's what the Rambam writes, and the Rav says, but it's against the halacha that you do go basar Rav to assume that the Eishes Ish is not an islandess, and therefore it wasn't the kedusha tois. So that's the Rav's kasha. So there's a way to answer the kasha. Some of you saw I have it right there in one of my svarim somewhere about this topic. There's a way to answer the question. But it is an issue. It's a kasha on the Rambam. Yeah, where did the Rambam get this idea from? The Gemara seems to be against the Rambam. Where did the Rambam get this from? The Rav is no good. So the Mishkanas Yankiv and Rabbi Chana Vasamin, Mishkanas Yankiv is from the first group who learned in Balozhin in the early 1801, 1802, when Rabbi Chaim Balozhin had founded the yeshiva. And Rabbi Chana Vasamin was before the Second World. He was killed in the middle of the war. The Nazis killed him. They murdered him. So they both say the same suggestion. The pasuk says, "Al pishnayim edim, al pishlosh edim yumas hameis." So you need 2 edim or more. Pishnayim edim or shlosha edim. Roiv is less than edim. When there's a conflict between edim and Roiv, so the Eidim are stronger. So the pasuk seems to imply anything less than 2 Eidim is not acceptable. You can't give din nefashis on a Roiv because it's less than 2 Eidim. And the pasuk said the same by Mamanis. Al pishne Eidim, al pishlosh Eidim, yokum davar. Yokum davar goes on din Mamanis. So yeah, anything less than 2 Eidim is not considered sufficient evidence. So how come we don't say the same by Dovisha B'Yeravah? Let's say you have to ascertain whether a woman is an Eishes Ish or not. So a Roiv is good. The Gemara says, let's say the woman says, Isha Shambhala Baila Gerashtani Nemenes, because an Isha Meiza Paneha Lifnei Baila. A woman will never have the chutzpah. Where was that Gemara? That's Rav Hamnuna's din. That's the second wide line on Chav Beis on the base. Amar Rav Hamnuna, Isha Shambhala Baila, she says in the presence of her husband. If she says and not in the presence of the husband, the Gemara said that maybe that's a machlekes hatanoim on Chav Gimel Amanal. But we paskin like Rav Hamnuna. If she says Amar LaBailo in the presence of the husband, says Gerashtani Nemenes. Why? Because it's a ruba dalesa kama chazaka. The word chazaka, we said the Pri Megadim many times. It's important to know that Pri Megadim says the word chazaka has 6 different meanings, and a lot of times it means a ruba dalesa kamon. That's what it means. Chazaka. The probability is Chazak Ruba Anisha Misa Pana Bifnei Bailo to say Gerashtani. That's so you matter and the woman is Becheskas Eishes Ish, but you have a Ruba Dalesa Kamon that she must be telling the truth because she says it in the presence of the husband. So you go basar roiv to be mekel on a dover should be erva. The same thing if you have a echod by meis bailo. You have an aguna. The husband, a couple is married, and the husband is missing. You don't know if he's alive or dead. And then you have an Eid Echad comes. An Eid Echad should not be believed. It's a Dova should be Erba. You learn that Gzera Shabbat Dova Dova Mimamikin Matzah Erba's Dova, and it says by Mammon. Al Pishna Edim Al Shlosh Edim Yocham Dover. But it never says it beferish by Dova should be Erba. It's only learned that through Gzera Shabbat. Beferish it only says it by Yumas Ameis, Al Pishna Edim Al Shlosh and Yumas Ameis and Yocham Dover by Mammonis and by Nefashis. So by Mammonis and by Nefashis you have a miut. Anything less than Shnei Edim, a roiv is less than Shnei Edim is not acceptable, not by Mominus and not by Nefashit, but by Davar Shabbat it's never beferish. That's only Gzera Shava. That means that Echad is no good. But since we don't have a ferish of pasuk, we say roiv is good. So that's Rab Hamnun says roiv is good, and we assume that when you have an Eid Echad, it says Meis Bailom. So how do you believe Eid Echad Mikra? Then you need two Eidim. So the Tosis there, Chod Beis and Beis, and Maschal Bo Aleh, the third Tosis from the top, on Chod Beis and Beis, quotes the Gemara in Yevamis, that's based on a Ruba de Leisa Kama, either Isha Daika or Minsava, Itochem Shechmarta Baleha, Besoif Eikalt Aleh Bitchilosa, that we tell a woman, if it turns out that your husband is alive and you remarried, you're going to have such a penalty. You're going to suffer the rest of your life. So the woman will research it on her own. She's going to try to ascertain seriously that the husband is really dead. So that's a ruba d'aleisa kaman. If the woman is fully convinced that she's allowed to remarry, she must have researched it, and it's a ruba d'aleisa kaman. The husband is dead. Either that's the reason, or the reason is that milsa david the Eid Echad, even if he's an achri, Eid Echad wouldn't tell a lie if he can get caught red-handed in the lie. So you matter an shish based on those ruba d'aleisa kamon. So you see, roiv is good by Davar Shabbat. Roiv is good. The Rambam and the Rabbi had a machlokes, but the roiv is good to ascertain the facts that are necessary to ascertain with respect to din nefashos. But here we're talking about Davar Shabbat. Davar Shabbat, where you do rely on roiv. It's just that psychological umdanis don't always remain the same over the generations. Things change. Take, for example, we had Rashi Shita. So the Tosfos came to defend Rashi. Where's the Tosfos? The long Tosfos on Yud Ches Amebes, the top Tosfos. V'kula boy delay delay. So Rashi holds that Bisman Batan Torah, the psychological Rumadina was a Migu de Choshed Amamayna Choshed Ashvuasa. And over the generations, it changed and it became Migu de Choshed Ashvuasa. The group of people who would be careful not to swear falsely became bigger than the group who would steal. And therefore the dinim changed. Because the psychology changed, the dinim changed. That's how Rashi holds. So you see that psychology can change over the generation. The Mela, the dinim may change. So that's what the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, when the Shulchan Aruch quotes Rav Hamnun is din. Isham l'bala gerashtani ne'amen, it's an isha me'isa paneh b'ifnei baila. So the Ramah quotes from the Hagos Maimoni on the bottom of the page in the Ramah. Hagos Maimoni was the Talmud of the Maharam Rutenberg. Together with the Rosh and the Mordechai, they have all the traditions from the Maharam Rutenberg. So he says that Bismana said we don't rely on this because human nature, psychological umdinas have changed over the years, and then women would be me'izim paneim. So we're not so convinced that there are Muslims, we're not so convinced that this psychological umdina still applies Bismana said. Yeah. That's a shayla, let's say, Cheskas Kashrus. There's a shayla, Suchuvas Pnei Yeshua. We are familiar with the Pnei Yeshua on Gemara. His grandfather wrote shayla Suchuvas Pnei Yeshua. So he has a discussion in the Chuvas Pnei Yeshua. Why do people have a Cheskas Kashrus? A person seems to be religious and he has a restaurant and he tells me it's kosher food, so I rely on him. So why do people have a Cheskas Kashrus? So the Chuvas Bnei Yeshua has a suffix. Is it because Rov people are Rov of the Jewish people are observant? So you go Basar Rov. So today Rov of the Jewish people are not observant. The Orthodox are still less than half of the Jewish population. So then it wouldn't apply anymore. Or as Cheskas Kashas, what we would call a Chazaka de Meikara, status quo. When the person was born as a baby, he didn't do any Averis. He or she didn't do any Averis yet. And now that the person is in his 30s or 40s or 50s, so the question is, did he remain the same as he was at the time that he was born at Tzaddik? He didn't do any Averis, so he has Nemanis on Kashrus, or did he change? So whenever you have a suffix, they say status quo, Chazaka de Meikara. You assume that the status quo didn't change in the person. If it's based on status quo, that it even applies in a generation where the Rov of the Jewish people are not observant. But it's based on Ruba the Leisa Kamon, so that the Rov clearly changed. So Bisman said there wouldn't be such a thing as Cheskas Kasha unless you know for sure who the person is. Unless you know the person well, then I have a Cheskas Kashas. So that's a question. Or Absolvechik, he said, not so convinced that the Ruba the Leisa Kamon of Lusa David Leglui Lo Meshakrinchi, a person would be afraid to tell a lie, to get caught red-handed in the lie. People tell lies and they get caught they deeper in the lie and garnished. They're not embarrassed. They're not embarrassed. Big statesmen, big diplomats. That's they get paid to tell lies all the time. The big lie. They get along. They get away with all the big lies, and they're not embarrassed at all. They don't seem to be embarrassed. That's why Rav said he's not so convinced that Chazaka still applies. Bisman is he thought the Chazaka of Yosef Mimashav Ish Rotza Lisa Hu Isha Rotza Linase. The women are more, we have a lot of dinim based on the assumption that the women are more interested in getting married than the men are. Tav Lamesav Tandu Milamesav Armalu. The woman would be happy to marry a man even though he's a good for nothing, even though he's nothing special. He never graduated high school and she has 5 PhDs and she earns the money and still she's heartbroken when they get divorced. It's a fact. It's a fact. So Rav Soloveitchik thought that Chazaka doesn't change. So people out of Taina, Chazakas change all the time. We say, Migu said, according to Rashi, it changed from the days of Matan Torah till and Rav Hamnuna, so the Ramah says maybe it changed. Bismana said there was a Yeridus Aderis. So why can't you assume that Tavla Mesav Tandu also changed? So that you thought not, because according to Rabbi Samson Raphael Hershel's commentary on Chumash, that Chazaka of Tavla Mesav Tandu is mentioned in Bereshis, so that's built into human nature. So he thought that's never going to change. And others were not so convinced. But that's what he insisted, that Chazaka is not going to change. Yeah. We spoke about the Pnei Yeshua. There is a comment in the Sifrei on the Pasuk in Dvarim. So it's a Le'yokem Erechad Be'ish. So the Sifrei has a drush on the comment, Be'ish Eid Echad is no good, but Be'isha Eid Echad is good. Where is that Eid Echad good by Isha? So the Pnei Yeshua understood that Rabbi Yehuda quotes this from the Pnei Yeshua. Pnei Yeshua was during his lifetime, he was known as a major posik. So he understood that to mean the posik tells you Eid Echad is good by Meis Bible, by an Aguna. The Gemara gave other reasons why it's Neman. No, the Pnei Yeshua said, Gemara was asking, why didn't they make a Chumrah Midirabbanan to do away with that thing? The Gemara explains why there's no room for a Chumrah Midirabbanan. Well, why is it Muta Mi'ikar Adin, Eid Echad is good by Meis Bible? So he thought, based on the Sifrei, had a drush of the Yakim Echad B'Isha Kamhu, Eid Echad is Neman by Meis Bible. So the other poskim thought that it wasn't correct. They thought that meant something else. That the Gemara says about women. The Gemara never says about men. The Gemara says about women. Kol shehigia lechalal shanim, higia lechalal simonim. If a girl becomes bas mitzvah, if you had yud beishanim v'yam echad, a boy in shtei cyrus, and a boy becomes bar mitzvah, if yud gimel shanim v'yam echad, and Shtei Saris. So you have to check to see if they have Shtei Saris. So the Gemara says by girl, once she reached the age of Yud Bechina v'Yemechad, she's 12 years old, if she already has the age of 12, she probably has the Shtei Saris. The Gemara never said it by men. So in the Magen Avraham, there's a stira. The Nitziv in his Chuvas, Meshiv Davar, has Chuvas, separate Chuvas, and then he has Ha'aris, Siman by Siman, not in every Siman. Every 30 Simanim, he has a little Ha'ara. So he points out the stira in the Magen Avraham. One place the Magen Avraham says that by men, by dinim deraisa, we're always machmed that you have to be bodik. You can't rely on the chazaka that since the boy is 13, he probably has Shtei Saris. You can only rely on that ruba the lesekama with respect to dinim derabanan. To be mitzaref him to a minion, so you assume he's already 13, he probably has Shtei Saris. But for dinim deraisa, that is, let's say he should be able to do chalitza, he should write a get. A cotton can write a get because you need lishma. Cotton's a la bardas, he can't do lishma. So in one place the Magen Avraham says by the cotton sheigili lishonim, he's already yud gimel shonim v'yamechad. You rely on the chazaka that Ruben Leskaman probably has Shtei Saris, but they get to dinim derabanan, but when they get to dinim deraisa not. And the other place, the Magen Avraham says even dinim deraisa also you do rely on the Ruben Leskaman only on the yoni issues when it comes to chalitza, when it comes to writing a get. Davisha the erva, there were more machmer to check. So that's what the other Rachmanim say, that Pshat in the Sifrei, Layak made echad beish, avakam hu beisha, that echad is nemon by an isha to be boidek, that she has Shtei Saris, because by women you have this ruba the leisekamon. But by men, we're not so convinced that you have that ruba the leisekamon. So that's the alternate pshat, and that's Sifrei. But the Pnei Yeshua came up with a mechudish dike pshat. We had a din, Ein Adam Eisem Atzmei Rasha. If the Eidim say, Ksav Yodenu Huzeh, the mother has a star halva, he wants to collect from the loiva. Loiva says, it's Mizuyev, I don't know who he is, I never saw him before in my life, I don't know who he is. So the mother has to make him a star. So he gets the Eidim whose name appears, and they say, yeah, Ksav Yodenu Huzeh. That looks like our handwriting. But they say it was a star amona. We wrote a star. The lawyer told us write a star that I owe him $100,000, but I really don't owe him $100,000. He wants to brag to everybody how wealthy he is, so he wants to show people evidence that he's so wealthy. He lends money to the rich people. So the lawyer who made a Haidos Badin to us, he told us we should write a star on behalf of the Malveh, but he told us that he doesn't really owe the money. It was a star Amona. So the Gemara says you're not allowed to sign a star Amona. Al tashkem alecha avlo. So if the Edom are going to say Ksav Yadenu Huzeh, Avol, it was a star Amona, so that's, you can't accept what they said, because they know that Mesim Atzmei Rosh. You don't believe it. Even though Kroivim are Nemonim. When you have the Nemonis of a Pesha Asa Pesha Yitbet, Kroivim are believed. So you can't say the reason why Ein on a Mesim, the Gemara says in other places, the reason why the din is Ein on a Mesim Atzmei Rasha, because Adam Korbeitz Al Atzmai, Ein on a Mesim Atzmei Rasha. Adam Korbeitz Al Atzmai is only when you're talking about Dinim Mominus, Dinim Nefashas, but here you're talking about a Pesha Asa. Pesha Asa Kroivim on Nemonim with a Pesha Asa. So there must be an additional pasuk, not the pasuk that Kroivim are posulators. What's the additional pasuk that teaches us that even in other nemonis, and not only in the nemonis of Edis, even in nemonis of Pesha Asar, you stay Ein on the Meis Matzmei Rasha. So we suggested maybe it's the pasuk. Where's the pasuk? Yeah, how does the pasuk begin? I forgot already. Oy. I forgot how the pasuk goes there. So the pasuk ends up Ashi Ashina Lakim, and the Gemara has a drasha.
I'll call Dvar Pesha. I'll show Machamor. I'll say I'll show Yomar Kiuza. I'll show you him. Shalim Shnaim L'Reya.
I thought that was, so where's the other pasuk? Why does it say Kefa Loshen? So whenever you have a Kefa Loshen, most Yumas, Hanik, Tanik, Nosen, Titem Pesach, Tiftach, Kavatik Berenu. So that's a machlokes of Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Shema, where they say, Dibber Torah Kedushaim Bein Adam. Kadosh Baruch Hu dictated the Chumash, the Moshe Rabbeinu, the same way people talks. The people always say extra things, funny way of speaking. So the Baruch Shalom dictated the Chumash the way people speak, and you shouldn't make any diukim from the fact that you have a Kefa Loshen. And we don't accept Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. We assume halacha like Rabbi Kiva. The Lord Dibber Torah Kedushaim Bein Adam. Whenever you have the Shonas Kvulim, you make a drasha. So it says him himatzi simatzi biyad hagneva. Why does it say twice himatzi simatzi? So we darshan based on Rabbi Kiva that the Lord Dibber Torah Kedushaim Bein Adam himatzi bi'edim timatzi b'dayanim. If you ascertain based on edim and the dayanim give a psak on it, then the ganav pays kefil. If it was Tavach HaMacha, the previous pasuk, it's Tavach HaMacha, then you pay dollar to hay. But if it's not Tavach HaMacha, he only pays kefil. To pay the Karen, you don't need dayanim to pay. If you have Edim who say that he owes he robbed $1,000 from the bank. He robbed $1,000 from the bank. So that's the Karen. So the Karen, you don't have to have Bezdin Smuchim for that. But in order to pay kefil, in order to pay kefil is knas. And a knas is an einish. And an einish can't be self-imposed on it. Einish has to be imposed by the Bezdin after the Bezdin was mavarer to the satisfaction of the Bezdin that the guy deserves the einish. So that's the drasha of the Torah Shabbat. He matzeh b'edim, ti matzeh b'dayanim. You have to have two edim who ascertain that he robbed $1,000 from the bank, and you have to have a Gemar Din of the Bezdin that he has to pay the kefil. You don't need a Gemar Din on the Karen if he knows on his own that he stole. So the Karen is mom, and so mom, and you don't. If you know on your own that you owe the money, pay. But if you're going to pay on your own the kefil, that you don't accomplish anything. Al Pidin, the chiyuv to pay the kefil depends on a Gemar Din. If there's no Gemar Din, even but Balatz is Sedei Shemaim, the Gemara said Beferish. It's a Yerushalmi, but it's a Bavli also. It says Tessid quotes it from the Yerushalmi, but it's the Gemara also, the Bavli, that you don't pay kef. So that's the part. He matzah b'edin to matzah b'dayanim. Then it says, Asher Ashina lehim mishalem shnaim l'reyehu. If the Bezin will make a Gemar Din, then he pays. So the Gemara says, Ashiashin Elahim, if the Bezdin will pass, Prat L'Marshia es Atzmo. So that's where they got this Lashon from. Ein Adam Mesim Atzmai Rasha. It's based on that drasha and that pasuk. If you would just have the psukim that kroivim apostle the edus and Adam Karbeitz Atzmo. So Adam Karbeitz Atzmo is only if it's a case where you need Haggadah edus. But he would talk about an Amonis of Pesha Pesha Eater. Kroivim are accepted. You accept them on us of Kroivim by Pesha Osef. There's such a case. But still, it can't say Ein on a mes matz meroshe. We wouldn't accept it. So it must be based. There must be an additional pasuk, not only because of Adam Korvei Tzalatzmo. So maybe that's the pasuk. Ashia Shem Lehim Prata Marshia Esatzmo. So the Rishonim have a machlokes. There's a Hagos Oshri on the side of the Rosh. You have somebody in the later generation put in Heoris on the side of the Rosh. Very often it comes from the Mordechai. Every so often it comes from the Or Zarua. At the end, they tell you whom they're quoting it from. So there's in the end of Baba Kama, there's a discussion, the Machlokes and the Balei HaTeisus. A person has a star that says signed by two Eidim, and he made a Kima star. His handwriting is authentic. It's a real star that says that Reuven owes Shimon $1,000. And so Reuven says, Nachon, I owe him $1,000, but I'm not allowed to pay the money because I didn't write what the $1,000 was. He lent me $1 million, and I promised to pay him ribis kitzutza. So, and the din is you're not allowed to take ribis kitzutza. I didn't know. I did know. I violated whatever. He says the $1,000 that it says in the shtar that I owe the other fellow is b'toras ribis deraisa, and ribis deraisa is an isa to collect it. So do you say ein on a mes matzmei Russia and he's not believed with that taina? Or not? So that's a machlokes in the Rishon. What's the machlokes? Because whenever you advance a taina, let's say if I admit that I owe the bank $1,000, I say why? Because I robbed the bank. I work in the bank and I took $1,000 and I did it in such a way that they didn't catch me. But I make a hidos baldin. So the bezim will not. The bezim, I make a hidos baldin. I owe the bank $1,000. I don't have to the business doesn't have to ask me, why do you think that you owe the bank $1,000? They don't have to ask me any questions. If I say, I'm not chayiv, the other party says, I owe him money, and I say, I'm not chayiv, so they're going to ask me why. I say, lo lavisi, I say, paraiti, I say, nis chayavta likenegdan, I say, machalta, have to give an explanation. And then I have to be neman on that. But to say that you are chayiv, you make aidos baldin, he's not mechuyev to explain why. He'll tell the dayanim why, so that time maybe he's making a mistake. Maybe he thinks that he owes the bank money, and he doesn't really owe the money. Maybe there was a hesek, but it was an inus. He smashed something in the bank, and it was inus gomer. So he's going to say, I owe $1,000 to the bank. And they're going to ask him, why do you think you owe $1,000? I'll say, because accidentally, inus gomer, I broke something. So they tell him, inus rachman apatra, you don't have to pay. But usually the din is, tzorach levar tainasa, if a person has a taina means I claim you owe me money, or you claim you don't owe me money. But if you admit that you owe money, there's no din, you have to be mevar. You admit that you owe the money, so pay the money, fine. So there's a din. The Malva has a star that the Leiva owes him $1,000. Leiva says, yes, it's accurate. The Adam signed, it's true, I told him I owe that. But the $1,000 I admitted because he loaned me $1 million. And the $1,000 was the ribis for the $1 million. And now I find out that Jewish law says you're not allowed to collect ribis. So that's his tainas p'tur. So that's a machlokes. When you say tzarech levara tainosai, that's in Sanhedrin. Tzarech levara, when a person advances a taina, he has to explain himself. Why does he think? He can't say, I'm potter and I'm not mechuyev to tell you the reason. You are mechuyev to tell the reason. But do you say he has to have, the taina that he advances has to be such a taina that he has nemonis on that? And if he's going to make a taina that I don't have to pay the $1,000 because it's an avera, because I did an avera, I borrowed the ribis, so you're going to say, Ein on the mesmatz me Russia, we don't believe that, so we can't believe your taina. We can't believe your taina. Like over here, he says, Ksav Yadena who's there, Avol, it was a shtar amana. So you're telling us that you did an avera, you signed the shtar amana. That's a violation of the din. Al Tashkem Alecha Avlo. You're not allowed to sign shtar amana. And even though it's not a pasuk in Chumash, where's the pasuk in Iyov? Al Tashkem Alecha Avlo. I forgot already. Where is it? I can't read. Here on Daf. You test on the base. Al Tashkem Alecha Avlo. Is it a Mishlei? No, says it's a Niyov. Yeah. Says it's a Niyov. So that's the Shaila. The fellas, the Loiva says, the shtar is authentic, the chsimas are true, but I'm not allowed to pay the money because it was all ribis. So do you say, tzorach levar tainos, he has to have them monis on the taina, and since they don't have matz mirash, he doesn't have them monis, so they can't accept what he said. So they throw it out. So he has to pay the $1,000. They say no. Tzorach levar tainosai just means to explain to the bezdin why he's potter, but he doesn't have to have nemanis on that. He doesn't have to have nemanis, even though that's ba'avera, and he doesn't have nemanis that he did in avera. but it's a valid tainus ptur, so he will be potter. So that's a discussion. The Hagos Oshri in the end, the Baba Kama has that machloikas from the Bali Atosis. Yeah, we had an interesting shaila. Let's say a couple gets divorced, and after the husband gives the get to the wife, so the wife gives it back to the Masada get, and he keeps it on his file. And then years later, the husband Tainus, my wife ran away from me. I never divorced her. So she produces the ptur that's signed by the three members of the Bezdin. He says, Mezuyef. Can he taina Mezuyef on a shtar ma'isa Bezdin? The whole din you can taina Mezuyef is a takana de Rabbanon. Maybe they only made the takana de Rabbanon on private stores, but if it's a shtar ma'isa Bezdin, it's a different kind of a shtar. So maybe shtar ma'isa Bezdin, you cannot taina Mezuyef. So that was a machlokes harishonim. So the bottom Taisus on Chof Aleph and Med Aleph, Eid v'dayim mitzdarf mashma, lafir b'shtar mekuyim chashina shem eziv l'chsim zadayanim. The person can taina mezuyef on the shtar ma'aseh bezdin, on the kiyum hashtar. And they quote from the Yishalmi b'feverish, but the way Rashi learns the Gemara, Eid v'dayim mitzdarfim, it's in the Babli also. So the Kesem Mishnah points out that if you look in the Rambam didn't learn like Rashi and Tosfos. The Rambam didn't learn that this is a case that you made a kiyum, that there's a shtar shein and bekuyum, then the Bezdin made a kiyum, and then you're going to have, he only did a kiyum on one chasima of the Eidim and one chasima of the three dayanim. So Rashi learned that's the case. Eid v'dayim mitzdarfim, we don't pass on like that. So the Rambam has a different shot. So the Kesef Mishnah writes, the Rambam, we know, always followed the Rif, usually followed the Rif. That's what they quote from the Chafetz Chaim. When the Chafetz Chaim had the family project to do the work on the Mishnah Brura, so they used to learn together all the time, and then he divided it up. Who should write the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch? So the different parts of the Mishnah Brura were written by different members of the family. So he said, whenever there's a problematic Rambam, you always have to look first in the Rif, because the Rambam had the Girsa of the Rif. He didn't always have the same Girsa as the Balei HaTosfos. A lot of times they look on the Rambam, where did he get this from? That was the way he had the Girsa in the Gemara. So the Kesef Mishnah says, the Rambam seems to hold like the Rif, that the Rif rejects that Yerushalmi. Tosfos quoted a Yerushalmi, the bottom Tosfos, on Chof Aleph and Aleph, Eid v'dayim mitzdarfim. Yerushalmi says they can tie a mizui if you need a kiyum, even a shtar ma'aseh bezdin. So the Rif assumed that we don't pass like the Yerushalmi. It never appears in the Bavli, and he thinks that in the shtar ma'aseh bezdin, you don't need a kiyum. And the Rambam learned differently from Rashi and Tosfos, so he seems like he holds like the Rif, perhaps, that you can't tie a mizuyif against the shtar ma'aseh bezdin. So that's a question. Let's say the wife has a tour, then the husband says, there never was. The whole thing is a fake. I never wrote a get, and there never was a bezdin, and it never was a ptur, and everything is a forgery. So Tosfos says you can tie a mizuyif against a ma'aseh bezdin also. The Yerushalmi and the Bavli is the same. And the Rif, and the Kesef Mishnah thinks that the Rambam agrees with the Rif. They had a different shot than this Gemara, and because they're assuming that there's no such thing. The Chumra Midrabanan, that a shtar sheini mekuyim is a chaspa bi'alma, was never introduced regarding a shtar ma'aseh bezdin. Machlokes in Rishonim. Yeah, we have Mishnayos and Yevamis. Here, the Tosfos is on Daf Chav Beis Amid Beis, Kigon, Shenisus Lechem Meideh, the fourth Tosfos on the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth Tosfos on the top. Kigon Shenisus Lechem Meideh on Chav Beis Amid Beis. So Tosfos quotes the Mishnayos. Let's say a woman was married and she took a cookie netter that makes it impossible to lead a normal life with her husband. She's never going to eat whatever. So she's going to eat crazy food. Or she took a netter never to get any hana from the husband. So there's no marriage over there. So if the woman is at fault for making such a cookie netter, so the husband divorces her and he doesn't have to pay any ksuba. Sometimes we'll say it's the husband's fault. He should have been made for the netter. So it depends. He can't be made for every neder. Some of the dorm you don't have the ability to be made. So if it's the husband's fault that they're getting divorced, he pays ksuba. If it's the wife is at fault that they're getting divorced, husband does not pay ksuba. What if it's nobody's fault? They fell in love and now they fell out of love. They're bored with each other. So each one thinks that they'd be happily married to someone else. So then the din is the husband always pays ksuba unless he can ascertain that is the fault of the wife. That's the Mishnah Ayin base. And then the Ran there discusses, the Ran has a machlokes, the Ran on the Rif has a machlokes, but the other Rishonim. So the din is, under all circumstances, the principle of the husband pays the ksuba, unless it's the fault of the wife. So then it's a penalty, it's a knas to the wife, it's a penalty to the wife, or maybe it's not a penalty to the wife. Maybe it's just biki hagabno the tikno chachamim. That's a shaila, whether she'll be moida. The woman will be moida that I never went to mikveh and I fooled you all the years and I told you I went to mikveh, it's not true. So if a woman fooled her husband and she wasn't going to the mikveh, then that's grounds for divorce, that the husband has a right to divorce her. So the shaila, so the Gemara has a question, how did the husband find out? So what do you mean how the husband found out? The wife admitted that for the last 50 years she never went to mikveh. So the Ran has a machlokes with the other Rishonim. If it's a penalty that we penalize the wife, that she loses the ksuba because she did such a terrible thing, then you don't believe her to penalize her. But if you say it's not a penalty, whenever it's her fault, whenever misakin takona or ksuba, we assume ksuba is the rabbanon. Rov Rishonim hold against the rabbin time ksuba is the rabbanon. Whenever the wife is at fault, so then there never was a takana. It's not a penalty. So then you wouldn't apply ein on the meis masmei rosha.
Rebbe, for the case in the Mishnah there, when nodaris enemis kayemes, if she was nodaris but it lent itself to a fara, would the baal also would it also be the baal's fault for not being mefer?
If what nodaris enemis kayemes, no.
So is that if the neder lent itself to a far, would that be the baal's fault, and he'd still be chayav ksuba for not being mafir?
If he knew about it, then he could have been mefer. Let's say he didn't know. So Gemara says, why is that affect? Let's say the wife decides she doesn't want to be religious anymore. So that's not grounds for divorce. If she doesn't want to cover her hair, that has to do with the marriage. If she's disrespectful to the in-laws, that has to do with the marriage. Now there is many mikayemes because babane dorim bane mesim. If she pledged to give money to tzedakah and she doesn't give it, and the husband didn't know about it, so then the children can die. That's what marriage is all about, to be together, the husband and wife, and to have children. Let's say the wife doesn't want to have any children. She wants to practice birth control all the time. They never discussed it before they got married. The husband thought, be marrying a normal girl, they're going to have children. And then she said, no, she doesn't want to have any children. So that's grounds for divorce. Because that's what a marriage is all about. That's what the Gemara explains there. Because Naderes Venim Kayas, Babanidar and Banimason. So Tosis here quotes the din. Let's say the woman took a neder and they went to a chacham, they asked him, is there a way to be mata the neder? The chacham paskin, no, you can't be mata the neder. Maybe if she would go to another chacham, he would paskin that there is a way to be mata the neder. This chacham says that not. So that chacham is not allowed to marry her. If that chacham was single when he gave that psak, if the chacham is married at the time that he gave the psak that the woman's neder is binding and she ruined her marriage and she's at fault, if he was single at the time, then we're choshed that maybe he gave a false psak in order that he should be able to marry her. So then he's not allowed to marry her. Mishum chashoda. Mishum chashoda. Well, let's say Eidecha comes and says Meis Bailo, and then the Bezdin says he tiruli, so then Eidecha, who said Meis Bailo, wants to marry her. He came all by himself, Eidecha. So we don't allow him to marry her because of chashoda. Maybe he said a lie in order to be able to marry the girl. So Tosis says, but let's say they had a Bezdin of 3 dayanim, and all 3 paskin that the neder that she took has no hatorah. So you're choshed that all 3 gave a false psak in order that one of them should be able to marry her. you're not choshev. That's what Tosis says. Whenever there's more than, but if there are two Adam who said meis baila, or the bezna of three who said then there is binding and the marriage is ruined. If there's more than the one person, then there's no chashoda. If it's only one person paskening, only one person saying meis baila, then mishum chashoda, you're not allowed to marry her. That's a din. Tosis quotes from the Mishnah. We discussed on the first daf in the parak, there's such a thing as Migu de Taina Ma'ali. Said there's a Migu, and then there's a Migu de Taina Ma'ali. Said what Migu means, if I claim that you owe me money, so if you give the most direct Tainas Ptur, you say Lo Lavisi or Paraiti. A direct Tainas Ptur, I don't know who you are, I never borrowed any money, or he says I paid the money, I borrowed and I paid the money. So then he's kai for hakol. He's nema menator b'lishvur. But if he has a complicated taina that's a little fishy, he says machalta on chayavta likenegdon. It's a little bit improbable. The odds are that it's not true. So then he's still neman b'toras migu. He's neman b'toras migu. If he would have advanced the taina of lalavisi. Or Paraiti would have been believed. So now that he says Machalta, he's also believed. But then there was a three-way stira between three Gemaras. The Gemara in Baba Basra and Daf Hey has an Ibaid Leib Shita. There's a Ruba de Lesa Kaman, Eiron and Parea Tochs Manai. So what if somebody borrowed money, and it comes after this mana halva, he lent them the money for a year. And a month after the year is up, so they go for a din Torah, and the Malva says he never paid me back the money. And the Loiva says, I did pay back the money. I paid it toch hazman. I paid it 3 years ago. He lent me the money for 5 years. I paid it 3 years ago. After the halva, it was only 2 years. So the Gemara says that's a ruba de lesa kamon, that it's not true. Einon aparei toch zman. But they have a shaila here. The din Torah came up after the 5 years were up. So the Loiva could have said Paraita yesterday. If he would have said Paraita yesterday, he would have been believed. But he says Paraita 3 years ago. So he has a migu. The taina, if he would have said Paraita today, he would have been believed. But he doesn't say that. He says a taina, Paraita 3 years ago, that's improbable. But he has a migu, so that's the suffix migu that's contradicted by a chazaka. The taina that he advanced is contradicted by the ruba de leisa kamon. The Gemara had a suffix whether migu b'makam chazaka is good or not. The Tosis over there says that there is triple stira. One Gemara says migu b'makam chazaka is good. One Gemara says no good. And Gemara says it's a tzveika dina. So which is it? Yes, no, maybe. Which is it? So Tosis gives doichik answers. So the Shach and Chosh Mishpat has all the Kalali Migu. I think at the end of Siman Pei Beis. It's only Shach. There's no Shulchan Aruch. Nobody else. The Shach took over the whole page there. So he has all the Kalali Migu. So he says the answer to Taisus Kasha is given by the Nemuki Yosef in Bava Mitzia. The Gemara is in Bava Basu Daf Hey. The Taisus with the suffix about Migu in it, where it's contradicted by a Chazaka, which means a Ruba Loisa Kaman. Migu Makam Chazaka. But the Nemuki Yosef gives the answers in Bava Mitzia. So the Shach quotes it La Locha. He says it depends. There are 1,000 different levels of Ruba Loisa Kamans. There's a Ruba Loisa Kaman 51%. 52%, 53%, 63%, 73%, 99%, 99.99%. There's so many different roivs. So if it's a roiv, the migu is contradicted by a roiv. So that's what every migu is. If he would have said lo labisi aparaiti, that's a normal tani says machalta. It's unlikely that machalta. So much money, they're not so friendly. Machalton is chayavta v'kenegdon. Punkt. Exactly the same amount. I owe you $1,000, but you owe me $1,000 because you crashed into my car. This chayavta v'kenegdon. So both of those tainas are unlikely, but that's what Migu is all about. If there wouldn't be a ruba leisa kamon against the taina, it would have been kai for hakol. Kofer Hakel is only if it's a normal taina. Lo lavisi aparaiti. If he says machalta, it's unlikely, but so then you have migu, it's good. And if it's a stronger ruba lesekamon, if it's a very strong ruba lesekamon, then it kills the migu. And if it's intermediate ruba lesekamon, then it's a divided leibshita. That's what the Nebuchadnezzar Yosef answers on the triple steer that the Tosfos asks. Then there's such a thing as migu detaine ma'al said. That's not really migu. The Rashi and Tosfos hold that there's such a migu. That's the Gemara Tezainim at Aleph, and it was in the first parak before. Migu detaine ma'al said means like this. I advance a taina explaining that I'm potter, and it's an embarrassment to me. I say I'm potter because the whole story, and it's an embarrassment to me to say that taina. It would have been much easier to me if I'm telling a lie. Why should I tell such a cockeyed lie that's going to make trouble for me? I would have said a better lie. So that's called migu de taina ma'al yiseh. The taina that I advanced shouldn't have any nemanis, but I could have advanced a different taina. But the other taina also wouldn't have nemanis. But the other taina, if I'm telling a lie, why should I put myself into a predicament and tell a lie that has negative implications against me? I would have said a better lie. So that's Rashi and Tosfos hold that there's such an institution of migu. The Gemara has it here, and once before the Ramban thinks that it was a fleeting moment in the Gemara that had as a havamina, but it's really rejected. At the end of the day, there is no such thing as migu de taina ma'al yiseh. And Rashi and Tosfos and Bab Metzia hold not so. They interpret Gemaras that is based on this migu de taina ma'al yiseh. If he's lying, he would have said a better lie. Why should he say a whole lie that he gets into trouble? Then we had Peshasa Pesha Hitir. So the Gemara tells a story of Banse de Shmuel. Shmuel's daughters, sounds like he had more than one daughter. Shmuel's daughters were kidnapped and held hostage by Goyim, and they could have raped them if they wanted to. And then Shmuel lived in Bavel, so the police were looking for them, so they went to Eretz Yisrael, and they were going to hold up the Jewish community for money to free the hostages, to free the two girls. So the girls were the daughters of Shmuel. So they must have heard from the father that if the Bezdin knows that she's a shvuya, then she's not a menace to say Tohirani. If the Bezdin didn't know that she's a shvuya, the whole source of information is from the girl herself. She said Dish Basi Tohirani, then it's a pesha sa pesha hita. Then even though later on they find out independently that she was a shvuya, it doesn't matter. So the two girls were taken hostage by the Goyim. They were not raped, and they took them to Eretz Yisrael because the Bavel police were looking for the kidnappers. So they took them to Eretz Yisrael to hold up the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael for their money. In the days of the early Rishonim, there was a whole story about the Abba Shvuyim, that there were 4 Rabbanim who were going on a boat for Achnasas Kala. They're not sure what that meant, Achnasas Kala. To raise money for the yeshiva, Yarchei Kala. Kala means the yeshiva. Achnasas Kala to marry off a girl. It's very unclear. And then they were taken hostage by Goyim. And then they knew that they can make a lot of money. So they sold each one to a different Jewish community. So they got the maximum amount of money. And then these Abba Shvuyim, they were big Talmidei Chachamim. So they taught Torah, each one in a different community, and they made a big hit. They were teaching a lot of Torah. So here, they brought the daughters of Shmuel to Eretz Yisrael. So the daughters said, let us go there's a synagogue here, let us go in, and then you'll come later. You give us an hour, and then you'll come later. So they came in, and they said, we were both Shvuyas, but we're both Tahira. They were not Ba'anas us, they were not Mizana with us, so therefore they were allowed to marry a Kohen. If it was Nivola to a Goy, she's not allowed to marry a Kohen. So they said, okay, she has a Pesha Hit there, because she says nish basi Torani. And then they said, and then the two girls say, but the kidnappers are outside, and they're not going to let us leave unless you pay them money, because we're held hostage. So they said, how did you know that you shouldn't let the kidnappers come in with you? That if we're going to see that you're a shvuya, then you don't have a pesha asa. It must be your father, must be a big Talmid Chacham. So they found out that it was Shmuel's daughters, and they had heard from the father many times. This didn't. If the girl says this basic Torani. So even though they found out before they married, since the Bezdin already passed and based on so the din is that not if she already married. She didn't marry anybody in 5 minutes. The Shabboim came in 5 minutes after they finished their speech. So the Rabbanim and Eretz Paskin that they have a pesha also. So even though later on, 5 minutes later, they saw that they were shvuyas on their own, he said so they said they must be the daughters of a big Talmid Chacham, must have heard it from the father. And then it happened that their cousins were there, so the cousins took care of them. Interesting Gemara. Then we had a machlokes harishainim. What's the din if you have a star big sav yodoi? If you have milva, the end of Baba Basra, you have Mishnah is the very end of Baba Basra, the very end. So if you have a milva al peh, so the loiva is believed to say paraiti, and if he doesn't say paraiti, and he doesn't have enough money to pay, Milva means Adam come and they testified that he borrowed money and to the best of their knowledge and never paid it back. So the din is he can only collect minei from the loiva. He can't collect from the lokuchas. If it's a milva bishtar, then it's not only shiba raguf, the shiba nechasim. So milva bishtar, the loiva is not believed to say parait because shtarcha b'yodi, my boy. And if it's a milva bishtar, then you do collect from the lokuchas. So what's the din if it's a milva b'ksav yadai? So the Mishnah says if it's only b'ksav yadai, you don't have two signatures signed on the bottom. You can't collect from the lukuchas. So it doesn't have the full din on milva b'shtar. But the fact that there's a shtar b'ksav yadai, does that prevent the loiva to say from saying paraiti? The Malva can say shtocha b'yodim my boy. The fact that I'm still holding on to the shtar is an indication that you didn't pay back yet. So that's a machlokes is the Rif and Taisus. Where is it? The Taisus on Aman Aleph. Here. Chof Aleph Aman Aleph. Hotzi Aleph Ksav Yodai. So Taisus says Pasak Rav Alphys. If it's a shtar b'ksav yadai, you don't say shtar b'yadai my boy. That cannot prevent the loiva from timing paraiti. If the malva is still holding on to the shtar that's signed by two eidim, then you say shtar b'yadai my boy. But if it's only shtar, if the shtar that the malva is holding on to is only kasa b'ksav yadai of the loiva, then the loiva would be believed to say parait. And the Balatesis doesn't think the Rif is right. When the other Rabbeinu Yitzchak the Ri Azaken, the nephew of Rabbeinu Tam, holds that it's on. Minayin lo ze'achilut, where the Rif come up with such an einfall. So there are two issues involved. One issue is, what's the umdinim? Maybe only if it's a full-fledged star that it gives the malva the ability to collect from the lukuchas, milva b'shtar. So such a star, the person there's an the loiva will never pay the money to the malva unless the malva surrenders the star. But it's only kosa b'ksav yadai. Maybe the psychology doesn't apply. But I feel in Tim Salaima that the psychology does apply. So there's still room to discuss. Maybe al pedin a star b'ksav yadai. It doesn't have the din of a shtar. If you know that it's authentic, so it's a haidos baldin. But if you don't know, the din that a shtar is made on itself, that hakol mistama, hakol behechshenase, That's only if it has a din of a star. Maybe Kasavik Savyada doesn't have the din of a star. Why not? So that's what Taisa says on the top line on Chofam and Beis. Top line Ishleima. The Edechad Bishtar L'Chashiv Shtar Alos Yesh Lo Shnei Eidim. Doing the Sefer Mikna, it says there Oid all of Eidim. In Yirmiyah, V'oid all of Eidim, and he got the Nevuah to buy the field in Anasos from his cousin. So he says he Eidim sign. So there's room to say only Eidim is good. If you have Kasabik Savyadai, that doesn't have a din of shtar. If you can ascertain that it's an authentic handwriting, then you have a raya that he made a Haidos Badin, that Loiva made a Haidos Badin, that he owes all that money. But maybe it's not considered a shtar. So the Shach Paskins like that. Shach Paskins that Kasabik Savyadai doesn't have a din of a shtar. So therefore Kiyam Ashtar would be deraisa by Kasabik Savyadai. Kiyam Ashtar is usually only with the Rabbanan because the shtar is made on itself. So the need for Kiyum is only the Rabbanan. But a shtar b'ksav yadai, so the Shach Paskins like the Rav Shrei going, shtar b'ksav yadai doesn't have a din of a shtar, so it's not made on itself. So if you say like that, then of course the loiva container paraita, and you can't say shtar b'yadai my boy, because that shtar b'yadai my boy that was Rebbe Akiva Eger has in the Chuvas. There are a few volumes of it, Chuvas. This is Madura Tinyana. It's not the original volume. The second volume, there's more than 2 volumes. So the Madura Tinyana of Rebbe Akiva Eger's Chuvas, he has that kasha. How can he be Moitzi Mammon? How can you make the loiva pay the Mei HaHalvoeh if he says Paraiti based on the Rubid Alesa Kamon Shtocha B'Yodi my boy, but there's a din in Halcham B'Mammon Achar HaRoiv. That's Rebbe Akiva Eger's kasha. So Rebbe Akiva Eger answers the kasha by saying in Halcham B'Mammon Achar HaRoiv means if it's a normal roiv, 85%, 95%, but 99.99%, if it's a very strong roiv, then you can't be Moitzi Mammon. And he fortifies that. He thinks that's the answer. Shtocha B'Yodi is a superior roiv, such a good roiv, it's even good to be Moitzi Mammon. So Rab Chaim thought that you don't have to go so far. The Taisus on Dalar Raman Aleph in Gittin says the husband divorced his wife, so he gave her a get. So if there were Eidei Chasima, and the Mishnah says in Gittin, Sheyu Eidim Chos Malaget Mevnei Tikun Ha'olam. Sounds like it's a takana the Rabbanan, the Eidim should always sign on the get. So Taisus writes there in Gittin, there is no such takana the Rabbanan. It's not necessary. It's a recommendation. It's a smart thing to do. If you're not going to have Eidei Chasima on the get, how is a woman going to prove that she is divorced? She's going to have the Eidei Mesira. What if the Eidei Mesira die? What if the Eidei Mesira moved to Medina Sayyam? How is she going to prove that she's divorced? So it's a Taiva Kamashman, and Mishnah recommends that the husband should always have Eidei Chasima. In addition to Eidei Mesira, should have Eidei Chasima. So when the get is given to the woman, it first serves as a shtar kinyan to make the gerushin, to break the marriage, and then it serves as a shtar raya that the woman is holding onto it, and she can claim, my husband gave it to me, and it wasn't b'psul p'legitach mal gabi karka. Everything mistama hakol be'hershel nasa. Whatever she says happened, we believe her because this shtar is always made on itself that it's kosher. So that's what the Shach Paskins like that. That shtar b'ksav yadai needs kiyum min atera, because it's not really a shtar. A shtar is only if you have edim, oid all of edim. Like that suggestion that Tosis made based on the pasuk in Yirmiyah. Rekach Sefer Mikne, it was a shtar, and it only has a din of shtar if edim sign. Maybe eid echad is also good, to the extent eid echad is good, balped. Maybe eid echad b'shtar is good. Maybe eid echad is not good. But if it's shtar b'ksav yadai, it's not edim at all. It's a raya b'ksav. Instead of being edis b'ksav, it's a raya b'ksav. A raya v'ados badin. So that's what the Shach Paskin, that's not called the shtar. So the Shach Paskin's la'alacha that the Gemara said at the end of Baba Kama that you have to always have Kabbalah Seidis b'fnei badin, but Bakiyam Ashtar will make you can do Kabbalah Seidis on the Kiyam Ashtar Shalai b'fnei badin, because the only need for Kiyam Ashtar is only Midei Rabbanim. So the Shach says not so fast. If it's a shtar b'ksav yadai, the need for Kiyam Ashtar is deraisa, because the whole Chiddush din that a star is made on itself, star is made, even things that the Adam didn't know at the time that they signed. When they signed, all they know is the husband, let's say a get, all they know the husband expressed an interest in divorcing his wife. You can't say that the Adam signed that he divorced her. They didn't divorce her yet. He's going to take the get, that signed, and then he's going to give it to her later. But at the time they signed, they didn't know that he didn't give it yet. But that's the chiddush of shtar. If the person on whose behalf it was intended to be written and given, if that the isha, husband writes a get, understanding that he's going to give it to his wife. Then the wife holds on to the get and she claims everything was done properly with Rabbanim, the way it's supposed to be done. So all of that calls nichnas bechlal haggadah seidus of the shtar. That's the chiddush din of shtar. Then there was a machlokes Rebbe and the Chachamim. Here, this Mishnah on Chafam base, the bottom Mishnah, two Adam come. The mother has a star that says the Lord owes him $100,000. So the Lord says, maybe it's Mizuya. I don't know who you are. I never borrowed any money from you. There is no such thing. So it has to make a kiyum star. That's a dimah derabban. So the Adam come and they say, yeah, it looks like our signature. So do you consider it as if they said, we remember the halva? Each one says, that's my signature. The other guy said, that's my signature. So do you consider it as if each one said, Almanisha b'shtar heimidim? If he said that looks like my signature, even though they don't remember the whole case, it's considered as if he said, I know for a fact that the loy owes the malva $1,000 because that's my signature. So do you say Almanisha b'shtar heimidim, or do you say no? They didn't say we remember the halva. They just said this is our signature. So maybe the din is aksav yodem heimidim. If it's aksav yodem heimidim, then you need two edim on each signature. If it's almanisha b'shtar heimidim, so you need two edim. Each one who says, that's my handwriting. Looks like my handwriting. If each one would have said, I remember the halva quite clearly. It was snowing on a Wednesday morning. He remembers the whole story. Slipped in the snow, and the other guy lent the money to buy a pair of boots, whatever. He remembers the whole thing. That's for sure. But no, they come and they don't say we remember the whole background. They just say that looks like our handwriting. So that's a machlokes satanaim. So Rebbe's opinion is almanisha b'shtar heimidim. And the Chachamim disagree. No, you have to have two Eidim on each Chasima. Aksav Yodem Eidim. So that's a machlokes. The details of the Takana D'Rabban that you need Kiyum Ashtar. How do we paskin? So usually we paskin Hilchos Rebbe if he disagrees with one of his contemporaries. Halacha Rebbe Mechabe Ro v'lo Mechabe Rov. If he disagrees with one of his contemporaries, he wins. Halacha Rebbe, that's right in the middle of Amud Aleph, Chafal Amud Aleph, right before the two dots. Halacha Rebbe Mechabe Ro v'lo Mechabe Rov. We don't when he's disagreeing with a group of others, so we don't pass like Rebbe. Same thing Rebbe Akiva. Halacha Rebbe Kibbeh Mechabe Rov v'lo Mechabe Rov. If he disagrees with another Tana, contemporary of his, then we pass like Rebbe Akiva. But v'lo mechaber rov, if he disagrees with two or more, so they're rabbim, so then we won't pass like Rebbe Akiva. So the same klal by Rebbe. Halacha ki Rebbe mechaber rov v'lo mechaber rov. Then the Gemara came up with this funny din. It only applies there is no application. I don't think there's any application on the level of the Raisa. It says al pishnai made him yokem dover, al pishnei him yokem dover. The Rashi says the mashmas is that half of the burden of the testimony comes half from one aid, half from the other aid. If you have a case where the kiyum ashtar, 3/4 of the kiyum ashtar is accomplished by one aid, and 1/4 is accomplished by the other aid. How do you have such a case? Let's say one of the Eidim who signed comes to Beth and says, it looks like my handwriting. And the other 8 who signed passed away already, so he's dead. He can't come. So the one who said, Deksav Yodi, this is my handwriting. So we say, you don't need another, according to Rebbe's opinion. You don't need 2 Eidim. If the person says, Deksav Yodi, that's already a Kiyum. So half of the Kiyum is finished already. Then on the Kiyum on the other 8 who passed away, so the one who says Deksav Yodi says, and I know for a fact that the other signature is by the person whose name appears there. I remember that he signed it. Or I remember I used to correspond with him. I don't remember this halva. I remember his handwriting. And then you have another person who says, I recognize the other handwriting. So 3/4 of the Kiyum Ashtar was accomplished by one person. So the Gemara said that's not acceptable. Naki rivi de mamayna puma dechad. Naka means subtracting 1/4. Rivi de mamayna. 25, 45, 75% of the case was accomplished through 1 aid. You have to have 1 aid accomplishes 50%, and 1 aid accomplishes 50. But here, if you're going to say the aid is Neman on his own handwriting, you don't need 2 aidim. If the person himself said, it looks like my handwriting, that's already solved. And then the person who said, this is my handwriting, says about the other one, that's the handwriting of the other name that appears there. I recognize the handwriting. That's the other dayan. And then you have another person, Menashuk, is going to testify. It comes out that 3/4 of the issue is being resolved by 1 aid. So that's Nakariva de B'mana Pum Dechad. Sachidish, the Gemara made up a din derabbanan that only applies in this one case derabbanan. I don't think there's any case. It never appears anywhere else in the Gemara. I don't think there's any. Usually you say, call the Tikkun Rabbanan Kain Derais. I think, what's the Kain Derais? There is no case Derais. It's strange. Maybe we should think of again. Maybe there is a case that on a level of the Raisa there's an issue of Nakariva de B'mayma, Puma Dechad.
Rebbe, why wouldn't it be a din d'oraisa in a case in Kiyum Shtaros d'oraisa, like Miksav Yado?
Yeah. So how are you going to have it?
You have Shtar Miksav Yado. Oh, but there's no other case. Let's say Victor Cohen, who says that when the Baal Din is Tom Mezoif in Kiyum Shtaros d'oraisa.
If you're like Rabbi Victor Cohen, okay. Okay, if you hold like Rabbi Victor Cohen. If you hold that only Hatziyad of Ksav Yadai, like the Shach Paskins, that Ksav Yadai needs Kiyum and Atera, so then would that also be a case? Well, we paskin that you need 2 Eidim on his signature. We don't pass like Rebbe, Alman Shabishtar. We paskin even on my signature, you need 2 Eidim. So the Gemara says, what are you going to do in such a case if the only 2 people who recognize the handwriting is the other 8 is going to be Nakariva de B'mayna Pum Dechad? The Gemara says, no, there's another way to make a Kiyum Ashtar on what he said. Not that he should testify, it looks like my authentic handwriting. Give him a blank piece of paper, tell him to sign his name 100 times. He's going to sign, he always signs approximately the same, always a little different, and then we'll check the Chasimas. So that's not based on Haggadah say this. He signed his name 100 times, and then we checked on our own. That's what the Gemara says. Because if we're going to testify, it'll be Nakiriv Maimah Pum Dechad. Okay, maybe there is such a case there, Rice. Okay, maybe there is such a case there, Rice. Then Taisus quoted a Gemara from the Gemara in the end of Bava Kama has a discussion about Danin and Dina de Garmni. Here it is. The Taisus on Chot from an Aleph, the bottom Taisus. Taisus 4 lines from the bottom Taisus. Bava Kama Daf Tzadik Chas. The Gemara has the machlek is Danin and Dina de Garmni. What's the case of Danin and Dina de Garmni? A loiva borrowed money from the Malva, and he gave a start to the Malva. The Malva is going to come collect. He'll make a kiyum ashtar come and collect. So some wise guy goes and he burns the shtar. He burns the shtar, but the loiva is honest. The loiva knows that he owes the money. So what's taka the din? A case like that. The loiva knows that he never paid the debt to the Malva. He owes the money to the Malva, but the Malva says, I lost the shtar. I don't know where it is. But the loiva admits that he still owes him the money. Is the loiva mechuyev to pay the money or not. He admits that he owes the money, he didn't pay. But it could be that he's going to pay now. It could be that the Malva is not telling the truth. Malva says, I lost it. Maybe he didn't lose it. Maybe he hid it. And then he's going to wait a year or two. Then he's going to come with the shtar and say he wants to collect the second time. So maybe the loiv is not mechuyev to pay the money, even though he owes it. He knows that he owes it. The loiv is not mechuyev to pay 1,000. He's mechuyev to make a pirua anachah. Pirua anachah means I got rid of the malva. It could be they're not getting rid of the malva. It could be the malva has the shtar hidden somewhere. So that was a shayla in the Gemara, whether kais from shover or ain't kais from shover. Then Tosfos on that Gemara quoted another Gemara that says, what's the reason for the opinion that kais from shover? Where was that Tosfos? Here, the Tosfos on Tezainam is based. So Samaris kais from shover. No, the wrong one. The next Tosfos, kais from shover. The Tosfos says the last parak in Baba Basra get pashut. The Gemara is meforish time among the Amikas from Shoy because Ebed Loiva Leish Malva. The Loiva is mechuyev to pay the money. The Loiva knows that he owes the money, but it may not be getting rid of the Malva. Malva may come. Could be the Malva told him a lie. Could be that he still has the shtar. He's going to come and collect the second time. So the Loiva is not mechuyev to give a matana to the Malva. He's mechuyev to make a piran. Piran means I got rid of him. Could be he's not getting rid. So the Gemara says, no, that's the pasuk in Mishle. Eved loivel ish malva. But here Tais said, we're not talking about a halvoa. So Tais said, Eved loivel ish malva is lav dafke loive. Whenever one owes money to another one, me'ezet tam sheyiyah. Choyvel, mazik, ksube, doesn't have to be dafke halvoa. Eved loivel ish malva means the one is mechuyev. The one is mechuyev will be mechuyev to hold on to the shover to be able to prove in the future. I have to hold on to it indefinitely. I have to have a file cabinet and hold on indefinitely to the shaver to make sure that the malva doesn't come to collect the second time. So that was the machlokes for the custom shaver. So the other Tosfos quoted, where was the other Tosfos? Tosfos quoted a Gemara in Baba Kama Tzadik Ches. The malva has a shtar halva that the loiva owes him money. And then a wise guy goes and burns the shtar. He burns the shtar, so the loiva may be a wise guy, and he won't want to pay. He'll say, prove to me that I owe you the money. He knows in his heart that he owes the money. But the loiva can be a wise guy and say, prove to me that I owe you the money. So because someone burnt the shtar, so the malva has no way to prove that the loiva owes him the money. If he would have the shtar, he could say, shtar chabiyone my boy. He doesn't have the shtar. So that's considered indirectly making a hezek. It's not mazik bi'adayim. He burnt the shtar, so the piece of paper it sells for a penny, for 2 cents. So we paskin danin and din de garmin. He does have to pay. That's the question: how much does he have to pay? How much does he have to pay? Does he pay the full amount of the halva? The halva was for $1,000. He pays the full amount of the halva. Serves Tarchab Shal Chaverai. Medina the Garmei pays the full $1,000. Or he pays Kamhu Shavalim Kabashuk. Maybe he pays how much would the shtar be worth if he would sell it on the market. It's not yet. He gives Mana Piroid. So that's a machlokes in the Rishonim. Medina the Garmei, how much do you pay? So the Gemara says, why does he pay anything? Idi Kasade the Adamai Habi Kasidei. Does it cause the Gemara Baba Kama Tzadik Ches? If there were witnesses who know that the shtar was burned, and they know how much money it said that the lev was the maba, they can write another shtar. Let them write another shtar. So Tes says, don't you see from the Gemara that you don't need das hamaschayv. If you need das hamaschayv, you have to go back to the loiv to ask him permission to write shtar. The lev is not going to give him permission to write another shtar. So Tosfos says, but we just said before you need das hamaschayv. So Tosfos backs out. You don't need das hamaschayv. But usually we assume you do need das hamaschayv. So that's what the Tosfos in Bava Kama on that daf. Tosfos gives a different answer. Or in Lamed Aleph, Bisham, and Yivam Mistaf Lamed Aleph, they give the answer. Once it was das hamaschayv, they write a shtar. You don't need das hamaschayv on the next shtar. They write the second shtar without an additional das hamaschayv. We didn't chazer kol makom sheminatory recha. We didn't chazer pagina dibura. I have a whole bunch of things. Tilosa b'psul. We didn't chazer. Okay. More chazer. Some other time. Okay. Tomorrow morning we'll have a midterm.
Is there share afterwards?
What?
Is there share after the midterm?
I don't know yet. We'll have to decide. Good.
Isn't Rebbe going to, isn't Rebbe ultimately going to the OU though?
I don't know if I'll go to